Hello, today I'm going to be discussing linguistic dialects in the diaspora versus the homeland. Some guiding questions that guided my search were: how has language morphed in the diaspora of Albanian Americans? How do Albanian Americans use Albanian in English? Alblish? Why do people use morphed language like this? And what is so specific about Albanian culture that creates this attachment or detachment to the language? Albanians for so long were in communism for over 4 decades. And for so long, because they couldn't love and appreciate the amazing things about their culture during that period of communism, they brought admiration and love for Albania and Albanian to the diaspora. Today I'm going to be talking mostly, when I refer to the diaspora, I will be referring to Albanian Americans, and especially new Albanian Americans and the new generation. These Albanian Americans were raised by Albanian immigrants that experienced communism, and they're quite often instill a passion for the land onto their children. This in turn leads into language learning and American culture being morphed by the passionate Albanian background that their parents didn't receive at all. When growing up in communism or being raised by individuals who experienced communism in the same land that they experienced it in, oftentimes people have a negligence towards that culture, whether that's out of resentment or out of what they're used to. It definitely causes that in return. This is them holding onto culture in ways that they couldn't in the homeland in America today. This often leads into religion as well, and people being very religiously driven and motivated because it was so utterly limited in Albania for 4 decades. A lot of times this leads into language as well. And although, like I said, the passion definitely leads into the diaspora and first generation children, sometimes, and in most cases, it isn't. In linguistic difficulties, one word I often think of is demek. It is an Albanian word that literally translates to supposedly, but in Albanian, it is often used when talking about something or someone acting a certain way that is usually false or changed and altered in some way. They would be considered demek, or the way that they're acting is demek of a certain way. It's a hard word to describe because there's so much meaning behind it, and this is the number one missed word use I have noticed in the diaspora. I hear people say demek in Alblish for every reason. When they do bad on a test or when they mess things up, they'll use this word, which is so completely different than the meaning in Albanian. The same idea exists in Agar's reading about language shock. He says, consider immigrant workers in Germany, mostly Turks, Slavs, and Greeks. They may never master all fine points of German grammar, but then again, who would? He says on page 16. Explaining the difference between German and Slavic and Greek languages make it very difficult to comprehend as an immigrant from those places, because the linguistic background is completely different. Slavs and Turks and Greeks have more of an ancestral connection linguistically than in Germany, whereas German is its completely own language. This is where that difference comes in. And I see the same thing in America with Albanian and English. This is a linguistic tweak I see, and it's essentially a fabrication that is incorrect when I talked about the word demek. So what is it about the language that makes this happen? Like I said before, one of my guiding questions was, what is so specific about Albanian culture that causes this linguistic difference? In my opinion, this makes diaspora children seem linguistically challenged. Although Albanian as a language is considered one of the most hard languages to learn organically. This is because it does not reign from a Indo-European language, but rather it is its own branch linguistically, and a lot of evidence online will tell you about that. Albanian is a very difficult language and has many things and tenses and grammar rules that don't exist in English makeup at all. This leads to the linguistic division between diaspora and the homeland, which in result creates a cultural and interpersonal disconnect in both. This often leads to code switching. And the frame of a mixed American Albanian household, aside from cultural differences, linguistic differences come in. I personally know more fellow Albanian American first generation children who speak to their parents in Albanian, but would refuse to speak outside of their household, even in Albania, that I know who don't. There's something about the pressures and linguistic specificities that exist in a place like Albania that is more acceptable in a place like America because there are so many more linguistic diversities. In Dent's reading about What's a Cellular Public, he explains why it would make perfect sense to modernly know your mother tongue extremely well. He says information technology has been the driving force behind many significant and outstanding economic and social changes all over the world. One of the outcomes and advantages of all this technology is the mobile concept and capability that many experts consider to be the underlying cause of the third industrial revolution. As an integral part of this trend, cellular telephony is one of the market's biggest contribution to digital convergence, personalization, and especially advances of multimedia applications. He explains on page 587. With this trend of technological advancements, there are billions of apps and programs and websites and schools even online that exist that people, especially targeted diaspora children, could easily learn a language on. I think the linguistic differences of Albanian American first generation children lie within traditional Albanian culture, and that is more specifically of negligence to learn Albanian through the stigma of how Albania is viewed today in the world. Some people aren't as proud to be Albanian in the diaspora as others are. They may feel that the stigma that the Albanian carries, whether that's within stereotypes or even just living life in a third world country, it's poverty level. People view different ways their homeland. In Eisenlohr, he explains this idea very well in Language Revolution and New Technologies. He explains Western public awareness of widespread language loss across the world today and the concerns motivating users or former users of a linguistic variety to engage in practices of linguistic revitalization. This is said on page 22. This is concerning many of linguistic changes of the non-practicing. Like I said, immigrant families may experience severe language loss over generations, within subsequent generations becoming lesser proficient in their mother tongue and more assimilated within the dominant culture of America. And this process leads so many concerned and so many experts concerned, like Eisenhower explained, to the loss of cultural heritage within these immigrant communities in the diaspora, similar to the concerns expressed in the quote that I explained. This in total is why I am personally an advocate for Albanians to become more instinctual and fight for culture, which goes hand in hand with language. Language is encrypted into culture every single day, every single time, especially in the diaspora and more specifically in America. If not, we could lose the one thing that keeps the heritage going, which is being Albanian.